Hey, Juliet.
Oh, yes.
Yay, recording resumed. I paused it to cut out the chit chat between Juliet and me, and we were both trying to remember to restart it.
There's Judy. Hi, Judy.
Hi, Judy. Lovely to see you. And we'll just get started in about 30 seconds, but who's counting? Yay. It's fun to see familiar and new faces. Really appreciate you guys being here.
Yeah.
Okay, there it is, 11 o'clock Pacific time on the dot. Hi, everybody. I'm Molly Gordon. I know a lot of you, not all of you. And thank you so much for joining us today. These Wholeness Hangouts are more or less monthly. In November, we're actually, it looks like, going to have two. I'm working on a second one this morning. But they're more or less monthly free gatherings for people to explore how to live wisely and well, how to access the essential, fundamental, underlying wholeness that exists in all human beings, but that can be so darned elusive. And usually we talk about that and point to that through the lens of our understanding of what's often known as the three principles. And sometimes I go off the reservation and bring in people who have similar insights, but from a different tradition. So you never know exactly what you're going to see here, but we're always pointing to fundamental principles behind the human experience. And we bother to do it because we found that it makes a real difference in how much we notice that we've got going for us, how freely we can access and apply and use the wisdom and well-being and love and compassion and good stuff that's available, and how to go with the flow when, in spite of our best understanding, it doesn't seem all that available. And my guest today is someone who's become a very good friend, Juliet Fay. Juliet, would you like to introduce yourself, or would you like me to read your bio, or what sounds good to you right now?
I'm very happy to say whatever comes in the moment, which might not be quite the same as the bio. So hello, everybody. I'm in West Wales in the UK. And I haven't had a very kind of traditional sort of career as such. So I've done lots of different things, including organic farming and marketing. And when I came across when the three principles kind of came across me, which is how it feels, I was actually employed as a marketing and business development officer for a heritage steam railway. So,
of course.
Which I did for a couple of years. It was a lot of fun. I learned a lot about heritage steam railways, about which I knew nothing before I started there. So, since then, since March last year, you kind of get a bit of a glimpse of something in this thing called the three principles. And my work has been moving more and more towards sharing what I have seen in my own exploration with groups mostly, and sort of sometimes one-to-one as well. So I still do bits of marketing as well, and I write poetry, and there's Terry. Hi, Terry. As I think I said in the bio, I haven't come up with a name for all those things yet. Maybe someday, or maybe not, I don't know. But I met Molly, well, she'll probably tell the story, quite a while ago actually, but it was because of Molly that I came across the three principles, which I'm always be grateful.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, I think our first connection, Juliet, was through Sean D'Souza's marketing work. And we were in an online community together, and Juliet, were you subscribing to my newsletter? Or? Yeah, and she saw a Wholeness Hangout that I did a couple of years ago now, I think, with Mary Schiller. And there is a link on the Wholeness Hangout page for this event that goes to a listing of all of the Hangouts. And the particular one that Mary did was on can a single insight turn around PTSD? And in Mary's case, it absolutely did. Juliet saw that and saw something that made it worth continuing to look in the direction of the three principles. And the next thing I knew, not very long later, I meet her in Oslo, Norway. Innocent person from Western Washington in the US and from Wales in the UK, and we meet in Oslo. And we had a really nice connection. And I have so much, I was going to say appreciation and respect for Juliet's work, which I do, but even more than that, I just freaking love her. She's really a cool person. So I want to say a word about participating. We would absolutely invite you to share your experience, your questions, your observations. You can do that in the chat, on a tablet or smartphone or computer. On a computer, if you mouse over the bottom of your screen, you'll see a chat icon. You have to fiddle a little more on a tablet or phone to find where it is, but it's there. You can also go like this, and I'll probably see you, depends on how I have my screen set up. You can unmute yourself and just say something at a timely place. I've muted a few people who weren't already muted just because we were getting a little feedback. That doesn't mean we don't want to hear from you. It just means we want to manage background noise. But feel free to unmute yourself at any point. And welcome. So Juliet and I got to talking, so many places we could go, but we got to talking about moods. I've certainly had a lot of interesting experiences behind moods. At various times in my life, I have had various diagnoses related to my moods. And with diagnoses or not, I found moodiness to be a present challenge pretty much since I was about 6. So that's just 58 years ago that they first started to be a challenge. And we're going to take a look today at what helps with that and what is going on when it doesn't seem to help anymore. At least that's one way I would say what we're up to. What would you say we're up to today, Juliet? And it doesn't have to match what I said.
Yeah, moods, eh?
Yeah. You ever have those?
Well, it's funny because it's a topic that's really sort of present for me at the moment because with a good friend, Elizabeth Lovius, we're looking at starting to write about moods. And isn't it funny when you start thinking about it? The very first weekend after we'd decided we were going to do this, I was in the most foul mood all weekend. And I just concluded, oh, well, this is some live research then for the book. So, and I think another thing behind it, Molly, was that there'd been something that was really bugging me for a long time that I'd heard, I think it was Sydney Banks saying somewhere, was that once you've sort of had an insight, you never lose it. You know, you might temporarily kind of lose sight, but you fundamentally don't lose that sort of awareness. And I was a bit kind of like, really? It doesn't feel like that. I was like, it doesn't feel like that. You know, when I kind of got stuck in a mood or lost sight of things, it felt very winter and summer, you know, that I'd gone back into winter and summer seemed unimaginable. So I got very curious actually about what is kind of going on there. And I think the other reason that it's of particular interest to me, it's like Molly, I think I could have a PhD in moodiness from a very young age also. But also because I work with groups in a local mental health charity, and mood swings, both actually the top of the range as well as, so, you know, manic and also despair, depression, things that we would experience as those kinds of moods, you know, are of great concern to some of the people that I'm working with. and you begin to realize there's quite a lot of fear around moods.
Yes. Wow. I could go off on everything you said so far. What have you seen about insights that seem to disappear? Because I've had that same experience. When I discovered the principles, and Judy has heard me say this, and I think Kathy has heard me say this, and Terry, I had a period of bliss for, I don't know, I'm guessing it was about 3 weeks. The only downside was that people who weren't in bliss kind of irritated me. I thought that if only everybody would see what I thought I had seen about thought, they wouldn't be so cranky. And after about 3 weeks, my mood shifted. And I thought, what did I miss? There must be something I didn't understand, because the way it looked to me then was that if I truly understood how life worked, the principles behind the experience, how life is created from the inside out, if I truly understood that each of us is whole and innately healthy, but for the moment-to-moment flow of thought, I would never feel crappy again. And since I was feeling crappy, I thought it meant I had a problem. And I went chasing the answer for a long time. And actually, Jennifer just put a note in the chat. Please talk more about fear around moods. I'm thinking in this moment, Juliet, and I wonder how it looks to you, that what I wasn't understanding, one of the things I wasn't understanding back then, is I was afraid of having a mood. So I was equating a pleasant or positive or stable mood with insight and well-being. And that fear was creating a problem over and above the challenge of being in the mood I was in. How does that look to you?
Yeah, absolutely. And it's surprisingly common, I think, to, anyone who has experienced moods that have kind of got in the way of how they want to live their life. And that can show up in any range of mood and any range of activity or behavior or lack of action or whatever it is. You can see there's a logic there to, those moods are a problem. I've got to be kind of watchful in case I get in those moods. And my experience was that I realized some way in that I had a very, very small range of moods that I thought were acceptable. And broadly, they were feeling positive, feeling motivated, feeling happy, or feeling contented. And I think was under some kind of, illusion that if I wasn't in one of those four moods, then something was wrong. And this goes back way before the principles. And I also, I used to get accused of having a Kellogg's cornflake view of, what life was supposed to be. And I don't know if anyone can relate to that, but, this sort of everybody sitting around some brightly lit kitchen, smiling and saying, how's your day? And, being really sort of benign is the word I would use. Mm-hmm. And so I think that what Jennifer said about the fear around moods, it can sort of creep up on you innocently, that you begin to, what happened for me was, if I just felt a little bit off, like maybe a bit bored or a bit lazy or a bit can't be bothered or a bit irritated or a bit, anything like quite low level, I think it was a bit like, the alert kind of went off, like, I've moved out of these moods that I think are okay. And, I better get rid of this kind of feeling a bit off, because that will lead to feeling worse, and when it feels worse, then and we kind of inadvertently, in my case, I think I had a whole story around, which didn't really have an end, sort of chaos, destruction, obliteration. I don't know, because I didn't get that far. It's just sort of this, it just felt instinctive, like I can't go there, and so I would do what from talking to so many people now, I realize is really, really common. I mean, in fact, we were talking about it in group last week, where, if we feel a bit off, the group came up with this fantastic list, of one of the things I think we can do is first, we just go looking for why we're in a mood. And, it's the usual suspects. It's them, it's me, it's, it's the weather, it's my boss, it's, it's my, my bank balance, the dog next door barking. I mean, we go through all these different sort of things, and have a lot of thinking about them. So if, when I hadn't come across the principles, that seemed perfectly normal to me. Why wouldn't I? And then I might start rooting around in my past or worrying about my future, and all apparently to try and just shift feeling a bit off. Or I'd go and pick a fight with somebody, distraction, or I would go for a run, or, And so, and when you begin to see, and I think it's one of the biggest things that opens the door for people in my groups is, when suddenly they consider the fact that it's okay, any mood is okay to be in any mood. They're actually, if we zoom far enough out, they're just on a spectrum of moods, and we decide that some of them are, good and some of them are bad, and this, that, and the other. So I can't explain why. I mean, somebody might have a good thought on this, but we just seem perhaps culturally to have kind of bought into some idea that if we're not feeling happy, then something's not okay. Mm-hmm. And this leads into the much deeper sort of area, which is that many of us, I think, end up concluding that what isn't okay is us.
Yeah.
I must be malfunctioning. And because I can't get out of this mood, clearly it's not just a little temporary problem. It's a fundamental, problem at core.
Yeah. It just occurred to me, it'd be like the tachometer in a car, if you have one that shows you how quickly the engine is revving. And if the tachometer were designed so that it was only acceptable to rev between 1,500 and 3,500 cycles or whatever, and it didn't show the rest because, I'm sorry, those aren't allowed, the tachometer would be functionally useless. But as human beings, we seem to live, or whether it's culturally or family or what, we live in the misunderstanding that when we're outside of this range, we're malfunctioning. And actually the whole range is functional. It may or may not be pleasant. It may or may not be helpful for certain situations, but it's all functional.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And the question occurred to me, why as human beings would we have the capacity to feel, because when you get into the nuances of moods, there's, emotion, there's loads, and they're very subtle. So wistfulness, nostalgia, grief, there's loads in between those, all little subtly different flavors. And, given that there's a sort of wonder about, how we even get to exist and the way we function, it begs the question, why would we have the capacity to experience all these emotions if we weren't meant to?
Yes.
But I think the other piece of it, that's all very well, but if you, as I did, tend to measure how I was, I measured it by how I felt. And again, I think this is a really common experience. So, you know, if I felt good and on top of the world and, you know, on top of things in my life, then I decided I was, you know, a confident, you know, functioning, not too bad sort of person. Whereas on days when I, you know, didn't and felt rubbish, I concluded that I was rubbish. And anyone who is doing that, who is attaching, who is believing that their feelings, the mood they're in, is basically an indicator of, say, their mental health, their well-being, is doomed then to just exist on this exhausting kind of, I'm okay, I'm not okay, I'm okay, I'm not okay. And for me, I think the first thing that I saw in that hangout that you did with Mary was I got a glimmer of, and I can't say it was a blinding insight and I suddenly realized I was fine, but I got a glimmer of, what if I am okay?
Yeah.
What if there's nothing fundamentally wrong with me here? I've just, you know, it's just looked like that.
Yes. Yes.
And that just got me very, very curious.
You know, Nikki has shared an observation that she's had the experience of a three principles practitioner seeming to assess her understanding, her insight, against how frequently she experiences some negative states. And Nikki, if you want to say something more about that, I want to invite you to unmute yourself and do so. And you don't have to. It's up to you.
Okay, I was asked to assess, like on a scale of 1 to 10 against things like worry, resentment, upset, how frequently I had those.
Mm-hmm.
And to be really honest, and so I was, and I was a little surprised. And it was useful, you know, as an awareness. It's just, and this is me, obviously, I left feeling like, oh my gosh, I thought I understood this, but I'm having these negative thought habits, and I'm in a very stressful time of my life. You know, that's subjective, but I am going through something with one of my children that's pretty intense. But it just brought in this whole quality of assessment.
Yes.
You know, that, and I'm thinking a lot lately about this whole notion of, I'm assessing others, they're assessing me. We check in and we say how well we're doing, which is a lot of self-assessment. And it's usually sort of about projects we have or things we're doing. And so, I don't know, I guess that as I'm listening to you guys, and there's a theme of sort of like, well, moods are normal. I mean, moods happen. We experience moods, and it's not necessarily a metric of who we are or how we are. I'm just thinking that, because even I've been reading and taking notes on the missing link, and Sid talks a lot about positive thoughts and the feelings. And so that's something confusing to me in the dialogue about the three principles is, you know, is there a striving for the more positive? So I don't know. I don't have the answer.
I love that you're bringing this up. You know, I would love to have a week to look at these. And there are various instruments and assessments, and I know sometimes in an attempt to calibrate how effective or helpful it is to look at the three principles, different programs have beginning and ending assessments of well-being. Before I go off on that, though, Juliet, I just want to invite you. Do you have anything you'd like to share or point to about this?
Yeah, there's thank you, Nikki, for raising that, because I think that was the sort of other piece of what we talked about a bit, Molly, was this thing of, you know, you see something around the principles, you feel like you're getting some understanding, some glimpse. That's what I'm hearing you say, Nikki, of, you know, maybe how it's working. And then you know, you maybe, because you don't feel great, we there's a tendency, and I did this for months. I thought I'd seen something that I was causing how I felt, and therefore I should be feeling okay. So it's back to this thing. So then I was judging myself for not feeling okay. So I mean, an assessment, you know, we just to you know, an assessment could be quite neutral. In my groups, we do an assessment at the beginning to sort of get people to rate, you know, their own sense of their own well-being, and then at the end of 6 weeks, because we'd like to see if we've had an impact. But that's also to do with, you know, so we can perhaps hopefully continue running, you know, programs that we can show that we're that people are getting something out of the group. So I obviously don't know the circumstances of your the context really of the assessment, but it may just have been so that they could in the future perhaps see if you answered anything differently. That was what occurred to me when you said you were being asked to do that measurement, because I'm familiar with asking people to do an assessment. But something that you might find helpful is that you know, I sometimes have people coming back to group who'll say, oh, you know, I saw something but I've lost it, you know, it's gone. and they feel a bit disheartened, you know, and a bit fed up, because they'd felt really good when they saw something. And what we've all found is really helpful, me included, because what Molly knows, I used to tell Molly about my swamp, being stuck in my swamp, where I seem to be quite happy to go and hang out there sometimes for days on end, is that there is something that seems to happen that I think you don't always notice what's happening until you look back. So what I've noticed is that the sort of difficult moods I had, that at times I would say I experienced at a kind of, you know, if we want to put a score on it, at a 9.5 in terms of how difficult, I suppose, I found them. So when I sort of drop into moods and things now, they can have the same flavor and the same feel and the same character, and I can feel a bit frustrated. But when I really look back, I would say that now they are around a 3.5, 4 in intensity and how long they last. Now, they don't feel like that when I'm in them, because I've forgotten a little bit quite what it was like. But also I think there's something more interesting going on as well, is that you mentioned about revving, Molly, and I love this idea of, it took me some time to realize, you know, if I think about my system as an engine, that at a period in my life when I was experiencing a lot of sort of mental stress and turmoil, I would say that, you know, my system was revving really high, but it thought it was idling. So my idle speed, for any of you that, you know, drive, was raised. You know, when you hear a car that's stationary and it's really going, but I wasn't aware of that. I had no, it just felt normal.
Yeah.
So if I sort of hit a mood, either a very high or a very low one, you know, I was going from that high revving place, you know, more revved, if you see what I mean. Now, for me, I didn't have a kind of blinding insight where it just dropped to a nice, gentle idle. It's been like, it's gone down like this over time, and in a way that you might not even really notice. So now, you know, when I feel out of sorts, I would say that I'm much more attuned to feeling out of sorts actually than I was before. Does that make sense to anybody? So because my idle speed is a lot lower, if I feel agitated, it can feel, quite intense in the moment, but it's nothing like the agitation I used to experience. And I have to sort of step back and remember that. So is that helpful, Nikki? Do you see anything in that?
Sorry, I was just unmuting. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay. Yeah, I guess the analogy that came to me while I was listening to you is it's like I don't eat gluten. And then and so there was a time when I didn't realize how bad I felt when I ate it. And then now when I reintroduce it, I'm much more sensitized to a little bit than what I was before. So I guess that's kind of what it occurred to me, that it's like a new normal, I guess. Yeah. What I'm hearing you say, it's a new normal. And so the link back to the whole entree around assessment was, wasn't a pre and post program assessment. So I'm not knocking that. It was an assessment of level of understanding correlates to positive moods.
Yep.
Sort of like you consistently are in this stress state. And I gain value. I'm not trying to be a critic of this.
No, I didn't hear that at all.
Yeah, I'm just saying that then I get confused about the principles, about my own understanding. And, I had to just really kind of, because that like probably affected my ego, like, oh gosh, I have some tens. I must not understand this very well. Like, how am I approaching this the wrong way? And, I'm pulling back from that too. And just realizing there's different versions out there.
There are, and we are all, as students and teachers, kind of finding our way, and that includes Sid. And Sid would have low moods. Language is really an insufficient tool, it's what we have, for pointing to the principles. And there are, on the face of it, confusing things in all of Sid's writing. He seems to say, change your thinking. And then one of my mentors is Aaron Turner, and Aaron will tells a story about going to Sid and saying, so Sid, what do you do with your thinking when you're in a low mood? And Sid said to him, why would you do anything? Well, because you told me to. Damn it. So meaning is one way I understand it, Nikki, and I don't think this is a universal translator, but one way I understand those things that Sid says, it sound like instructions. Change your thinking, he talks about change the DVD, is that's descriptive. It's like what's missing is the context of what happens when your mood change is that you have changed your thinking, or that your thinking has changed. But who's doing the changing? The personal mind can't do it. We can't do it from here. But there's a way, since we are part of universal mind, that we absolutely can do it from there. Mm-hmm. But it's, Sid uses the image of a glass elevator for levels of consciousness. And when you're on the lower floor, you can only see so much. And when you're on an upper floor, you can see more. And what I've come to see is I can be in the basement and have a fantasy or a memory or an idea of what it would look like on the 5th floor. And I criticize myself for not being there because I can imagine being there. And I get so confused. It's like, well, I know better. But actually, I don't know better. Because if I did, I would, it'd be different. And that's mystifying. Because for one thing, I think one of the things that complicates it is the degree to which I want to get off of the ground floor maps to the degree to which I jam the control panel by taking my low state of mind and pushing buttons. And the elevator gets stuck, and I think it's because the elevator doesn't work or because I don't work. But those are just some images that have helped me get a different feel for these apparent contradictions, Nikki. I don't know if that's valuable or not.
Yeah, it is. Thanks.
Yeah. Yeah. And I want to loop back to what Jennifer said about fear of low moods, because whether it's fear of low moods or judgment of low moods or preoccupation with whether it's low or high moods, both Juliet and I have had high moods that have been problematic. And over time, as we keep, it used to make me crazy when I hear Michael Neal or people say, keep looking in this direction. It's like, okay, just tell me what direction that is and I will. What direction? And, but as we do, keep wondering, where is my experience coming from? If to the degree to which I can wonder in an open-minded way, what's up with this mood, I may have an opportunity for an insight. But usually I'm asking what's up with this mood, but what I'm really asking is what's wrong with me. And as one of my early coaches, who as far as I know doesn't know anything about the three principles, once said, what's wrong with me is not a question, it's an answer. It's a declaration. There's something wrong with me. And I've spent so much of my life in the habit of living in that declaration that it's taken me 7 years of looking in the direction of the principles to discover how much that was shaping everything for me. And over time, it just seems to have dropped away. So the one thing I want to offer people is I got to be the slowest student in the class. I really thought I got something in the beginning, and I think I probably did. But it doesn't hold a candle to what I've got now. And I'm pretty sure that if I keep looking in this direction, what I've got now won't hold a candle to what I see in 3 weeks or 5 years. So at least provisionally, and I'm crossing my fingers because who knows when I'll get attached to my progress, at least provisionally, it no longer looks very significant to me to assess how far along I am or how well I'm doing. And that doesn't mean it never occurs to me. It's just that usually when it occurs to me, it doesn't look actually any more profitable than wondering if my butt looks big, which has finally dropped off the map of what I decide to care about. What do you see, Juliet? And others, I feel free to chime in, folks. This is great.
I love that, Wally. It's great. And now I'm going to compete with you for slowest learner, though.
It's a race to the bottom, Juliet.
Yeah, my friend and I, we were messaging recently, and she sort of knows a bit about the principles as well. And we were just comparing our special hammers that we use to, hit our heads with.
Yeah.
But yeah, there's a couple of things I want to share which I've seen very recently, which might be helpful. So, I don't know how many of you have found yourself in a place where you start saying to yourself, I know this is just my thinking, but, and, even as I say it, my experience of that particular expression or statement is that I'm really frustrated. And I remember actually hearing Linda Pransky talk about this, and I found it really helpful what she said, so I will share it briefly, which is that you know, if our feelings and thoughts feel real, which is the characteristic really, isn't it, of when you're in that sort of and you're saying that thing to yourself, then, you know, in that moment we're falling for the illusion, you know, which those of you who are familiar with the principles, which, you know, will suggest that what we're experiencing is coming from our thinking, conscious or unconscious, in the moment, and our kind of measure of that is how we feel. And so it's a little bit to your point, Nikki. You know, it's not about some measure that is fixed. It's moment to moment. So, you know, if I'm feeling really bad and ruminating about an email or whatever it is, and I start saying, you know, I know it's just thinking about that email's really annoying me. You know, in that moment, the illusion is real to me. You know, the emails upset me. That's the illusion, that it's the email that's upset me. And it's a bit like you saying, I love that, trying to hit the buttons in the basement with, you know, with your low mood, actually, with your, you know, in that same kind of caught in that illusion of our thinking, we start trying to climb out, and you can't. So, and this is I really want to emphasize, this is in the moment. This is nothing to do with, you know, an objective measurement of anybody's grounding. This is in that moment. You know, if it occurs to us, and quite often in my case, you know, I'll be merrily lost in the illusion and have no clue that I am. I won't even notice. But if it does occur to us, you know, then the only way we would come out of that is if we see through the illusion of our thinking. And she talked about, you know, it's what you're saying, Molly, about looking in the other direction or looking in this direction. And another way of thinking about it is, if this resonates for people, is just getting really, really quiet and getting curious. You know, what am I not seeing here? Because, and I think what's important, what I heard in what Linda was saying, and I found it helpful, is that if you don't acknowledge that you're caught in the illusion, and you just start berating yourself and criticizing yourself that you should know better because, you know, you've seen something around this understanding, then you're just cluttering up the mind with more stuff, you know, more thinking, which tends to just keep the basement, you know, keep you stuck in the basement, to use your analogy, Molly. So, and you know, to be honest, sometimes, yeah, I can slow down a bit and get curious, and sometimes I can't. And the more this goes on, the really good news, folks, which we all, with a sigh of relief, came across in our group, was that even if you spend days or weeks like tormenting yourself with that hammer, you will still eventually come out of that mood. And one little fun sort of experiment we often have in the group is, you know, go away and try and be grumpy for 8 hours solid without interruption. And I had one young guy who tried it because he didn't, you know, he wasn't really, he likes to say he argued with me a lot. I don't remember him arguing with me a lot, but anyway, he said, I couldn't do it. No, I couldn't do it. Yeah, try it, because eventually we crack a smile, something comes along. So before you came across the 3 principles, you wouldn't have been berating yourself about not seeing your thinking, and your mood would shift, even if it's just a little bit. Moods just do. So I don't know if that's helpful. I sort of said several different things there, but
really appreciate that quality of, or 2 things. One is to notice, and what comes up for me is to have the humility, if I can set aside my frustration and sense of failure for having a low mood long enough to actually wonder about what I don't see, instead of argue with what I don't see, or debate what I don't see, or criticize what I don't see. I mean, I've got a lot of different flavors of fighting the fact that I don't see something. Linda also talks beautifully about human frailty. And I think that was a piece I really wasn't interested in. I have not sought spiritual and psychological understanding so that I could get a better handle on human frailty. I have sought it, frankly, because I wanted a way out of human frailty. Like, do I look stupid? Why do I want a human frailty? And I just couldn't let myself take a good look at human frailty for the longest time because I was just so not interested in that. And as I developed, and this is just for me, the rest of you may be far more evolved than I've been, but as I developed a little humility and the willingness, for me, the willingness to feel crappy, either have a crappy experience in the moment or feel crappy about my experience in the moment, as I developed a little more humility there and saw that my best sometimes looked really bad. That was a huge insight for me. I finally got curious about something that I'd heard around the principles but kind of edited out, and that's the possibility of being okay whether you feel okay or not. I wanted to feel okay, full stop. And I was looking at feeling okay, being relatively at peace with whatever I experienced as the short path to not experiencing the bad feeling. So I was theoretically open to it. I was willing to feel crappy because the payoff would be I wouldn't feel crappy. I was trying to hack the system. And I don't know how to draw the insight path for anybody else, but I can guarantee you that there is a customized insight available for everyone who's kind of been caught in this snarl around not liking how they feel. If you keep wondering about it, you'll see something. And it will change something. And it will change for the better. But it's unlikely, in my experience, it's unlikely to be what you think you want. Damn it. I've been doing a pretty good job of not swearing so far, but that one, I'm sorry, that's not acceptable. So, there is relief, there is greater ease, there is greater freedom, there is greater clarity, there is more space in and around moods, but it's not an escape hatch. Yeah. What comes to mind, I don't know about anybody else, but a metaphor that's helped me, or an analogy, has been movies. I go to movies and I like crying at a sad movie. I don't much like scary movies, so I don't go there, but I like action movies and I'm willing to jump out of my seat in shock and surprise, and I would count that a good movie. But in my life, I didn't want to include, I liked your image, Juliet, I only had a certain range of what qualified for good experiences. It would be horrible to have that narrow a range for movie going or book reading. And I'm finally beginning to see the delight in expanding that range, which doesn't mean that they're enjoyable in the moment. But there's something rather exciting and even thrilling about the whole range of human experience, including human frailty, that we can wake up to. But I couldn't get there the way I was trying to go, because like I said, I really wanted to pass around that personally.
Yeah.
So we have about 10 minutes. Please feel free to speak up out loud or in the chat with any questions or observations or insights that are occurring to you. And Juliet, feel free to hold forth on whatever else has shown up for you.
Yeah, I just following on. I love what you were saying there about, you know, that it isn't, you don't get a free pass to, you know, as you said, sort of bypass certain emotions. And again, I think for people for whom moods have become problematic and stop them doing things or stop their life being as they would wish, it's back to where we started the call, really, about the fear around it. And I've seen there's so many paradoxes. I find this understanding full of paradoxes. I'm not surprised anymore when I come up against, you were saying, when you listen to Sid, it's a bit like riddles. And I find I come up against things which just seem really paradoxical. So the thing around emotions that is kind of really hard to talk about, I think, until you actually experience this a bit for yourself. Perhaps it's hard to trust with somebody just telling you about it, but I'll give it a shot. Is that, you know, my story was that emotions were, I felt, you know, they were out of control. So I was looking to control them, which is, you know, what you like, same as you, Molly, looking for a, you know, I want to keep them in a safe range. And it was back to, I think it was Jennifer asked about the fear around it. And what I've discovered is coming as in the time that I first came across the principles, I Molly knows this, I had a period of about 4 months where I was just weeping on and off, seemed almost constantly. And I wasn't kind of full of snot or sobbing. I mean, it was literally just water falling out of my eyes at all sorts of times. Sometimes it wasn't very convenient. And I think what I came to see, and I still haven't found a better way of describing this, is that I had so much thinking about my feeling state. You know, I was like a bouncer on a nightclub door. Do you have that, like a security guard on a nightclub door who's going, oh, no, you can't come in, no. And, you know, so there was piles and piles of thinking about how I felt. It was almost constant unless I was actually engaged in another task where I couldn't be thinking. And in fact, that was one of my things I used to do. I used to get very busy with projects and all kinds of things, so I wouldn't have time to think. And as the idea that I was okay, for me, it's gently taken hold, you know. It wasn't a boom. It was a gentle taking root, I think. What I actually experience now is that I would say I'm more emotional than I used to be. Yeah. But now I feel emotions in the raw. So an example of that was I was driving along and a song came on the radio and I felt like a physical oomph, and I felt some big surge of feeling. I don't know what it was. You know, I felt tears. The song was on for maybe a minute. And when the song finished, the feeling just passed straight through. And I was left, I don't really know what it was. I didn't have any real need to name it or work out why it happened or where it came from. It felt, and this is going to sound a bit odd, but it sort of felt exquisite. And I remember thinking, I don't think I've ever felt a big emotion like that in that raw sense. So that's what I mean about a paradox. As the thinking about how we're feeling falls away, which I agree with you, Molly, it just seems to get a bit less. We seem to open ourselves to a much greater range of emotion, and it's very rich.
Yeah. I love that example, Juliet. I officiated at a celebration of life on Saturday. for a woman who had been a really good friend of ours who passed away. She's had Alzheimer's for the last several years. And her daughter, who passed away just over 2 weeks earlier. And her daughter had had a lifelong struggle with addiction and was in a methadone-based recovery program when she died. And anyway, I was giving a reading, and as I started, I looked out at this group, 75 people, and I said, I'm just not going to be able to do this without crying, just so you know. And there's no way now that I would want not to feel whatever it was. And I don't know, was it grief? Was it appreciation? Was it awe? I really don't even know what it was. But the raw experience, I like what you said, the raw emotion, the raw feeling, there's something pretty cool about that. Yeah. That we wouldn't want to edit out. And it also occurs to me to say, it's really forgivable to have a human experience. We're human beings. And I remember being in a session at one of the Three Principles conferences last October. Leela Turner and I were presenting, and Kathy Casey was in the audience. And there was a woman there who was struggling with depression and had been around the principles for a while and couldn't quite figure out what was wrong with her, that she wasn't getting it, or what was wrong with the principles, that they weren't helping. And one of the things Kathy said is, you know, we need to be careful, and probably more careful than we are, as coaches and teachers, therapists, practitioners of the principles, that we don't leave people with the expression or the impression that if they don't find relief from their life's problems in this understanding, they're doing something wrong. Because that's not so, and it complicates it. It does appear that there is a lot of, it does appear that healing is absolutely available through insight into the principles. But God knows there's nothing wrong with a human being. Insight is not proving to be the universal antidote to the experience of being human. Because so far there isn't a way out of that. It just isn't.
It occurs.
Jennifer remarks, it sounds like opening up to being vulnerable. Absolutely. Paul, say something.
It just occurs to me that to the extent that what we do drives people into their thinking about what they're doing wrong or they're not doing it right, we're just exacerbating the problem.
We are innocently.
Yeah, definitely. You know, Julia, you know, I can't remember what your words were, but you were speaking to sort of smaller events feeling bigger, you know, as you quiet down. And I was having the thought that it's sort of like, you know, a soft sound is drowned out in a crowd, but in a quiet room, you know, you can hear it. And I know that, you know, I had a recent experience. I got a thing going on with my adult son, and I was running some pretty busy thinking, you know, and it kind of stuck, like, how do I relate to this? What's my course of action in this? And, you know, I got some wise counsel to, you know, just get curious about it and slow down, which I was able to do. And, you know, a day later, boom, here's wisdom that really, you know, at this point, I'm still sitting with concern about my son, but I'm also back in knowing of, you know, my well-being and his well-being. And that I could not have heard what I heard if I had stayed on my 1,200 revolutions per minute, you know, thinking cycle instead of dropping down to, you know, like a slow idle at 400 RPM or something. So, yeah, I mean, it's funny to me because it seems like, you know, the principles apply to our understanding of the principles. You know? Yeah. And that's where it can kind of start to get like, well, confusing and paradoxical, and you know, yeah, and yeah, this is like that counsel that I heard from the two of you about slowing down really resonates for me. I mean, it feels like if there's any one thing that looks to me like a good idea when I can't see anything else, it's slowing down, and then to whatever extent I can, just being inclusive about what's going on.
Absolutely.
Versus fighting it, because in a way that's supporting the slowing down too. So.
Yeah, and fighting is always revving. Understandable, forgivable, doesn't help.
Yeah, right. Right. And very much our wiring as human beings. So it's,
Right. Bill Pettit actually shared something with me on a webinar recently. And then I'll wrap this up because I know we're at the hour, guys. But we live in a physical body, and the brain is hardwired, at least parts of the brain, to do survival things and to have certain kinds of survival, adrenalized thinking. And if we take that as an indication of our spiritual status, we're really confused. And it's understandable, but you can have all kinds of reactive thinking. That's down to the brain. That's how it happens. It doesn't mean anything about who you are or what you understand. So thank you. Juliet, how can people learn more about you and your work?
Okay, so there's a website which is Soulcare, which is SOLCARE.org, where I blog. But I also host a Facebook group which is free. It's called Love Your Life Again, in brackets, Moods and How to Survive Them. So just ask to join. There's a few questions, and then it's me that says whether or not you can come in. So you'll be all right.
She's pretty easy. Both those links are on the page that you presumably use to get to this Hangout. In the next few hours, the replay of this Hangout will also be on that page. Please share that with your friends and colleagues and family members. And thank you, everyone, for coming. Juliet, thank you. I wish we had more time. I love this. And I think this is a really important inquiry. We'll do it again.
Thank you, Molly. And I just want to say to anyone who hasn't worked with Molly, I did Molly's Art of Living course twice because it was so good. I did it again. So, and it was wonderful. And I would, well, you know, you've seen Molly on the call. I highly recommend hanging out more with Molly.
Great. Thank you, everybody. Take care, you all.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye.